It had been one of those weeks that felt like a month. Endless meetings, phone calls that never seemed to end, and deadlines that kept slipping away like sand through my fingers. By the time Friday evening came, all I wanted was to get home, order some takeout, and let the world carry on without me for a while. But as I walked toward the train station, a sharp gust of wind cut through the air, carrying with it the smell of rain. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, the forecast had promised clear skies. But I would soon learn that the night had no intention of following a script. The station was unusually crowded, and I could sense a ripple of agitation running through the commuters. Moments later, the loudspeaker crackled, announcing that all trains were delayed due to technical issues. Groans and sighs echoed off the tiled walls. I checked the time. 45 minutes until the next possible departure. Great. I found an empty spot against one of the tall pillars, dropped my bag by my side, and prepared to pass the time scrolling through my phone. That's when I noticed him. He stood a few meters away, leaning casually against the far bench, a book in his hands. The crowd around him seemed to dissolve into background noise, as if he existed in his own calm, self-contained world. Something about him felt familiar, though I couldn't place why. His dark scarf shifted slightly in the wind that occasionally swept through the station, and in that brief movement, I caught a glimpse of a subtle, easy smile as he read. I tried not to stare, but the human mind has a funny way of getting caught on things that feel out of place. In this noisy, restless station, he was the still point in a turning world. The next time I looked up from my phone, I found him glancing my way. Our eyes met, just long enough for me to feel a flicker of curiosity spark in my chest. I looked away, pretending to be deeply invested in my phone screen, but my thoughts kept circling back to that quiet, steady figure. I was still wondering about him when the loudspeaker announced again. Trains would not resume for nearly another hour. A collective murmur of frustration rippled through the crowd. I sighed and pulled a book from my bag, hoping to lose myself in its pages. "Is it any good?" a voice asked. I looked up, startled. It was him. His tone carried an easy confidence, and his expression was friendly, almost as if we'd spoken before. "It's all right," I said, holding up the cover. "A bit slow." He smiled. "Funny, mine's the same." We shared a brief laugh, and just like that, the tension of the station seemed to fade. His name was Daniel, and as we talked, I learned that he had missed the earlier train and had been waiting for nearly an hour already. He was on his way to meet a friend for a late dinner across town. I found myself telling him about my exhausting week and my original plan to spend the night doing absolutely nothing. Conversation flowed more easily than I expected. It had that rare quality of feeling unforced, as though we'd simply picked up from a conversation we'd started long ago. The rain started unexpectedly. One moment the air was still, the next it was roaring against the station roof. The loudspeaker crackled once more, this time delivering worse news. The delay would be indefinite due to flooding on part of the track. Groans turned to complaints, and people began calling ride shares or wandering toward the bus terminal. I looked at Daniel and half joked, "Guess we're stranded." He tilted his head toward the exit. "Maybe stranded isn't so bad. Ever taken the long way home?" I hesitated. The sensible thing would have been to decline, to find a taxi and go straight home. But something about the night felt charged with possibility, as if saying yes might lead to something memorable. Against my usual cautious nature, I agreed. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle. Daniel suggested a nearby cafe he knew, open late, warm, and, in his words, a bit of a hidden gem. The streets glistened under the streetlights as we walked, dodging puddles and laughing when either of us misjudged one. The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. We found a table by the window and ordered coffee. That's when the night took its first unexpected turn. A man in a dark jacket burst through the door, scanning the room with quick, searching eyes. Daniel tensed almost imperceptibly, and I caught the shift. The man spotted him, made a beeline for our table, and dropped into the seat opposite Daniel without so much as a hello. "You're hard to find," the stranger said. "Not hard enough, apparently," Daniel replied evenly. Their exchange was quiet but loaded. and though I couldn't catch all the words, I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. After a brief, terse conversation, the man stood, gave me a polite nod, and left as quickly as he'd arrived. I stared at Daniel. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," he said, clearly reluctant to elaborate. Curiosity flared, but I didn't press. We talked about other things instead. Music, travel, the oddities of city life. Yet the encounter lingered in my mind like an unsolved puzzle. When we finally left the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets damp and reflective under the lamplight. We were halfway down a narrow side street when we heard footsteps behind us. I glanced back and saw the man from the cafe trailing us at a distance. Daniel noticed too. Without breaking stride, he leaned closer and whispered, "Let's take a different route." We turned down an alley that sloped toward the river, the sound of water growing louder as we walked. The man followed. My pulse quickened. Daniel suddenly grabbed my hand, not in panic, but with a calm decisiveness, and pulled me toward a side door that led into an old brick building. We slipped inside just as the footsteps rounded the corner. The door clicked shut, muffling the outside sounds. The building turned out to be an old riverside warehouse, now converted into a quiet gallery space. The walls were lined with large atmospheric photographs of city life: foggy bridges, lantern-lit streets, rain-slicked sidewalks. The place was empty except for us, and the quiet was almost startling after the tension outside. "Sorry about that," Daniel said after a moment. "Sometimes people from my past pop up unexpectedly." His tone suggested the matter was complicated but not dangerous, at least not to me. I wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't ready to share the full story. Instead, we wandered through the gallery, talking about the photographs and the strange magic of the city at night. It was easy to forget the odd encounter just minutes before. When we stepped back outside, the man was gone. The river shimmered under the moonlight, and the streets were quieter now, the city beginning to wind down. Daniel suggested walking along the waterfront, and I found myself agreeing without hesitation. We reached a small park where the path curved toward an old footbridge. From there, the view of the city skyline was breathtaking. Rows of glowing windows stacked against the night sky, the reflections dancing in the water below. We stood there for a while, just taking it in. "This is my favorite spot in the city," Daniel said softly. "Not many people know about it." "It's beautiful," I replied. "Feels like we're somewhere else entirely." He smiled, and for the first time, it felt like I was seeing him clearly. Not just the calm, composed stranger from the station, but someone who carried both stories and secrets. Someone whose life had edges I couldn't quite see. We stayed at the park longer than I realized, talking about everything and nothing. When I finally checked my phone, it was nearly midnight. Daniel offered to walk me home, and I accepted. The streets were nearly empty now, the occasional taxi gliding past. At my building, we paused. The moment felt suspended, like the last note of a song that you don't want to fade away. "Thank you for tonight," I said. "For what?" he asked with a small grin. "For turning a long, frustrating wait into something unexpected." His eyes softened. Sometimes the best nights are the ones we don't plan. We said goodnight, and I watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner. I went inside, feeling as if the entire night had been a thread pulled from an ordinary day, weaving itself into something I'd carry with me. And though I didn't know if I'd see Daniel again, I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes a night full of surprises is exactly what you need, even if it starts in the most unlikely of places.